This is America First. I'm Sebastian Gorka, former strategist to the president, and it is always good to introduce a new guest from the conservative mothership, the Heritage Foundation. We are welcoming today the Vice President for Government Relations at Heritage, Tommy Binion. I like his style because in the break I said, are grown men allowed to be called Tommy? And did he blush? Did he waver for a moment? No! He shot me in the gut and said, are grown men allowed to be called Seb? We like your style, Mr. Binion. Welcome to America First.
Well, sir, I'm taking my punches from, or I'm taking my cues from you and the president. You've got to punch back as you showed us all. I'm a big admirer, and it's great to be on your show this afternoon.
Well, thank you kindly. Thank you kindly. So, I have my sources. I won't divulge them, but I have been reliably informed that you guys, D.C. may be a ghost town with the sagebrush rolling down the avenues, but Heritage is working. You may all be remotely sequestered somewhere, but man, oh man, are you out there supporting the president and supporting our nation? So on behalf of our listeners, on behalf of my family, thank you so much, Tommy, and Kay Cole James and everybody else at Heritage that's doing such a fine job. You have a certain expertise, and I want you to share it with our listeners because there's a crunch moment in these contingencies where we want the government to act, we want them to act fast, and we want them to protect us and secure us. And there's this kind of model that's been around from Roosevelt that, okay, just throw cash at things, make government bigger, and we'll be okay. Heritage has a different approach. Talk to us about the dangers of legislating things incorrectly in a time of crisis. And please talk to us, Tommy Binion, about what the Heritage Foundation is recommending to the White House and to the American people.
Yeah, so there's a lot to go in there. The first thing I'll say is a guiding rule of policymakers should be first, do no harm.
Yes.
And the way that you do harm is exactly what you just said. You react very quickly. You react without a thought. You do what Nancy Pelosi did on Friday night and give members a bill to vote on mere minutes before they are supposed to vote on it. You do what happened in TARP, which is where you vote in the middle of the night for fear that the markets will crash in the morning if the Congress hasn't acted. Legislation is very hard. It's very sweeping. There are a lot of stakeholders. You cannot do legislation that will solve any problems in a matter of hours. Let's look at what happened over the weekend. Nancy Pelosi forced a bill through at midnight on Friday night for no good reason. They didn't have a deadline. They just wanted to go home for the weekend and the week of recess. In fact, the Senate could not act on it any sooner than today. They had already gone home. So Pelosi was reacting to an arbitrary deadline, and she pushed a bill through. It was 108 pages. They've now put out an amendment that is 87 pages.
Wow. A
technical corrections amendment that is 87 pages. So think about that. 108-page bill, and you've got 87 pages of corrections 2 days later. That is how you make a big mistake. And I want to be clear. This bill that we're talking about today, this is not the big one. The big one is coming. The economic stimulus bill, the $1 trillion bailout, that's not this bill. That is the next bill that's coming next week or the week after. And if this is the process, if this is the style of legislating, we're in for a world of hurt.
We're talking to the Vice President for Government Relations at the Heritage Foundation. He is Tommy Binion. Follow him, TP Binion, Binion. And, of course, it's heritage.org. In the 2 minutes we have with you in this segment, before we roll into the next one, Tommy, what are the things that we have to be super cautious of not packing into that legislation? Forget about all the stuff we know the Democrats are going to do with trying to get money for abortions and everything else. As conservatives, what do we have to, what breakers do we have to put in place right now?
Do not put in a bailout that sets a precedent that tells American businesses they can run their business assuming the government will bail them out. That's the problem. If airlines can operate on the very margins that if they take any sort of disruption in their service, the government will backfill them, then that takes away the pressure for them to operate their business in a responsible way. And you tell all the other industries in the country it's okay to do that as well. Businesses have to operate with a certain degree of personal responsibility. If you bail them out in a time of crisis, you are telling all businesses in all industries that they too can expect a bailout, and then they will behave irresponsibly. We know that happened in TARP, and we can't let that happen in this scenario because the taxpayers flat out can't afford it. What we should do instead is attack the underlying problem. The fundamentals of the economy are fine. What's wrong? Well, there's a shock to the market because of coronavirus. So what can we do? We can do legislation that's targeted at specifically the public health crisis, and in the long run, that will be better for the economy. That will get us back to work sooner.
It's a very clear message. All conservatives should be able to understand and relate. Personal responsibility should also translate into corporate responsibility. This isn't a time, an excuse to just throw cash around. We're reading these crazy figures. We already have an unbelievable deficit here in the United States. I'm very glad to see a president that's breaking the mold, isn't saying we just have to make government bigger, which has been the trend since FDR. What else must we be incredibly cautious of as we see all this new legislation potentially being packed down the throats of the American voters?
Yeah, so the big spending is particularly concerning. Two things about that. One is when you hear the figure $750 billion and it's attached to the word Democrats, know that there is a reciprocal offer from the Republican side, and this is particularly true of Congress. What happens is they say, I want $750 billion, and then the other side says, well, I need $750 billion for this. Right. And so the compromise becomes $1.5 trillion. I don't know how the figure doubles when the compromise gets involved, but that is typically what happens when it comes to the big spending out of the United States Congress. 750 could become $1.5 trillion in the blink of an eye when these members announce a compromise. That's particularly concerning. And then keep in mind, as you alluded to, we are currently running a deficit over $1 trillion already. Now, that was a figure that was concerning when when the economy was humming on all cylinders. Now we've got this shock to the system that is the coronavirus. If we go into an economic downturn and we add on top of that, if we double the deficit that we're running in fiscal year 2021, we could be talking about a death spiral. The federal deficit could contribute to our fiscal problems and actually make things worse. We have got to be really careful. We've got to stick to our principles. Yes, this is a crisis. Our principles were made for crisis time. Principles are just that. They aren't meant to be broken. When things get tricky, they are meant to be stuck to. And one of which I think all of your listeners would agree with is fiscal responsibility. We talked about corporate responsibility in the last segment. Fiscal responsibility, we all know with our personal budgets to be careful during this crisis. I'm not seeing those encouraging signs coming out of the United States Congress.
So we've got 1 minute left with our friend, Vice President for Government Relations at the Heritage Foundation, Tommy Binion. What is the most important thing that Heritage is saying to those on Capitol Hill when it comes to this massive package that will be coming down the pike in a week or two? What is the most important warning that you guys are trying to get across?
Deal with the health crisis, and that will be what is best for the economy in the long run. If you skip dealing with the health crisis and you instead shovel hundreds of billions of dollars to your favorite industries, you'll just be papering over the problem, and it will persist for longer. The only thing wrong with the economy right now is the coronavirus. Let's deal with that, and the sooner we can deal with that, the faster the economy can get back to work. Focus on the problem, get the problem right, and by the way, they love the saying, don't let a crisis go to waste.
Yes.
We've got to push back on this. This is not your opportunity to give your friends billions of dollars. This is your responsibility to focus on your obligation to the public, to get this public health crisis under control.
It's quite remarkable that anybody has to say this right now, that in the midst of this situation, we shouldn't be supporting our pet project and getting more pork approved on Capitol Hill. But it has to be said because that's what we witness far too often. Thank you for joining us today. Give our best regards to Kay Coles James and the whole incredible Heritage team.